Hello and welcome to Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. Today we are joined by Troy Lamel-Stovall. Troy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, we're pumped to have you here. And before we jump into everything, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background with everyone?
Sure. I'm an engineer, computer scientist, got his MBA, into the dark side, got my MBA from the dark side institution of all, Harvard Business School. And have been blessed to have worked as an engineer, as a consultant at a place like McKinsey. I worked at a place like Southwestern Bell and the old Bell Labs. And now I've worked at a number of educational institutions, higher education institutions. But now I run an entity here in Maryland called TechCo, and we are responsible for the venture capital arm that does the early stage technology investments for the state. And so that's just check writing, James. It's also supporting them and whatever else they might need beyond just the check writing.
That's great. And you work with all sorts of different companies, right? I mean, it's not specifically within one sector of tech, right?
No, the tech, as you know, the term is tech agnostic is what we are. But because we're here in Maryland, we clearly do see a lot of bio, life sciences, med tech, as well as cyber, but we've got a range of other entities that we've been able to involve, everything from unattended flight vehicles, B2C, a lot of stuff in a bunch of other industries beyond just cyber and life sciences.
Got it. And I think it was, you were saying too, it's earlier stage companies, seed round, Series A. Is it all like post revenue, or do you do some pre-revenue companies as well?
Yeah, we definitely, I'd say, from a stage point of view, we get them as early as what I call post napkin, when it's coming off the napkin. And we actually have one of our funding vehicles actually works directly with our research institutions. So we actually work with those to do the tech transfer. So again, it's that stuff that's really early, it's pre-concept, pre-MVP in many cases, and pre-de-risked. And then we take them through we take them through the seed stage, get them to a revenue stage, Series A, B. And so our check sizes at the early stages are in the 150 to 253 range, and then we'll go all the way up to 2.5 to $3 million for that Series A, B.
Okay, that's great. That's very helpful, just so everybody understands your point of impact in the world, your corner of the world that you live in, right, in which you specialize in. So exactly. Thank you. So we were talking about a couple of talent principles that are shifting from how it was maybe 10, 15 years ago to what we're seeing accelerated due to COVID. I was hoping you could walk us through the talent landscape as you see from the perspective as an investor working with tech companies. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, it's a different place. There was always remote work, particularly in the technology space. There was always people who were physically in one spot where the job was. And I think COVID has enlightened a larger set of individuals, a larger set of firms, to a larger set of sectors, to the fact that there still can be a fairly significant number of productivity even with individuals not physically located on a consistent basis. And I think there's a couple of key words in that sentence, I think. And I'll start to end, the consistent basis. I think the notion, James, of 5 days in the office for most industries, not all, is dead. I think it is dead as a dinosaur. I think this notion of having periodic time in the office, there's still a huge amount of value in coming together. I do believe that we have lost what I'd like to call the spontaneous innovation. When I've got an idea and I can just walk down the hall to you, James, and we can get on the whiteboard and sketch it out. Now I got to get time on your Zoom calendar, right, before I can get to you. So I think, although we've seen a fairly consistent productivity, I would argue the innovation and the spontaneous innovation that's been lost. And I also think what's been lost is, when I first started this job now 2 years ago, Zoom is brutally efficient at firms of making me meeting. I can, both know you can do meetings after meetings after meetings because there's no transition time. And that's actually, I think, part of the problem because there's no transition time. But the ability to build real relationships is missing. And so when I put all that together, to answer your real question, put all that together, particularly for an entity like TechCo, whose job it is, one of our missions is to create an innovative culture, an entrepreneurial culture for Maryland, and that to be really blunt about it, how to create entities and jobs for the state of Maryland. Well, when all of a sudden, some of those, when talent doesn't observe, I'm here in Maryland, and we're just south of us at the Potomac River in DC, in Virginia and then DC, and then north of us is Pennsylvania and Delaware to the east. Talent doesn't know anything about those boundaries. Matter of fact, particularly in the DMV area, talent very easily moves, back and forth between the district, Maryland and Virginia, or the DMV. For some of your listeners, if they don't know, that's called the DMV. And so I think part of the real issue is it's a talent and a metrics issue, because we've got metrics, we've got legacy metrics that made the assumption that the job and the person were in the same physical space. And I think what's happening now is the job and the person are not always going to be in the same physical space, but our metrics are still assuming that's the case. And so it's a question of both metrics as well as talent acquisition, or the war for talent, as many people call it. Because now all of a sudden, whereas James, you used to fight for people coming together because there was a great place to live, because there was a proximity to your job, all of a sudden, like here in Maryland, we got data, I guess towards the latter part of 20 and the first part of 21, where, again, for your listeners that don't know, we have a thing called the Eastern Shore, which is a really nice part of the state. And then we have Western Maryland. The new housing stock in the Eastern Shore and Western Maryland had gotten to an all-time low, because, James, people woke up and said, you know what? I mean, if you don't know, we have this thing called the Bay Bridge, which takes you back and forth. And it's a long bridge. And like today, Friday, going there, you don't want to be in the Bay Bridge today. You just don't. Believe me, just trust me, for those that aren't living here. My point is, there were people who said, I could do once a quarter, once a month, once or whatever. I got to drive from Eastern Shore to Rockville or Bethesda or Baltimore. I can do that. I can do that. I can live somewhere. I don't have to be near my job. And so that's changing the dynamic of how people have to think about recruiting of talent. It's changing the metrics for entities like TEDCO and other entities like TEDCO across the United States. So I think it's a combination of talent acquisition, as well as how we measure where that talent is and what the definition, the economic development definition, is going to be.
So I have one question for you that I have is, I do agree with you that in person can be very valuable from a relationship perspective. I agree with the efficiencies of remote work. There's several, Zoom, as you said, transition time, but obviously from like an overhead perspective too, less office space can mean that money can be reallocated into demand side motions, increase salary to get better talent. There's definitely other benefits there too.
Yep.
But on the flip side of the coin, you have creativity, innovation, deep relationships, empathy, things that are very important to companies, and even to us on a human level, can be a little bit lost. So particularly, I'm curious for let's say your seed, your Series A companies that maybe they're establishing a small team, maybe they're 10 people to 30 people, kind of within that range in terms of full-time headcount. As you said, there still is a war for talent, and it's really interesting what's happening in the market right now is where it looks like we could be potentially entering or in a recession. However, the talent pool is still incredibly tight, which is a little bit unlike what we've seen in the past. So I'm curious to hear how you, like, what message are you sending to founder CEOs of these Series A companies? Is it's, look, open it up remote, it widens the talent pool. You can also compete for talent in areas where maybe it's less expensive salaries, or are you still saying you need to find people that are able to be hybrid and come into the office occasionally? Like, what message are you sending to your portcos?
Yeah, that's an outstanding question and a difficult one for me, because this is where I'm schizophrenic, because as the CEO of TEDCO, I have to say, try to get that talent in Maryland. That's what I have to say, right? But as someone who understands, and the venture capitalist understands, how do you, attracting talent wherever that talent is, I'm telling them, go get it wherever they got to get it, right? And so that's the schizophrenic, nature of because of the nature of what I do. But your answer implies the latter, right? Your answer implies, where can you go get the best value? And I'm going to use the word value, talent. I think is because cost. I have this thing about words, James, is that when you use the word cost, your mind will immediately go to lowest, regardless of anything else. It will go to lowest. If you use value, you might think about lowest, but that's not the thing. You're going to think about other things to take into account in terms of utilization, in terms of how it's going to, the longevity of it, lifetime value, all those things will be taken into account. Lowest might still come into a play, but it's not going to be the sole determinant as if you use the word cost. And so I think it is a value point that we need to talk about our talent. And also, you're not saying this, but I think it's not just the acquisition of talent, but I think more and more companies have to be very intentional about what they do with their talent. And I think, if you really think about talent, there's really this pipeline of activities. There's everything from the sourcing and actually how you write the job description, to how you onboard talent, to how you develop that talent, to how you compensate that talent, to how you groom and coach and develop the talent, and eventually how you exit that talent. And I think enough companies don't think that whole value chain through and think about how you're taking someone through that and investing in them along the way and creating a sense, people all the time say, whether it's an early stage or a Fortune 1000 company, Fortune 5 company, that the people are their most important asset. But the reality of it is most companies don't really invest in thinking through how that happens. They tend to just assume it's an HR thing. And I'm one of these persons, actually, everywhere I've been, including here at TEDCO, I've renamed the HR department to talent management or talent optimization, because that's really, it's about talent. It's not about human resources. It's not some clerical thing that's, worrying about, making sure people get paid. It's about, if talent is that most important, that person should be right at my side as I'm thinking about strategically all the things we're trying to consider and what's the talent gaps that we need in order to fulfill. Can we groom it, or do we have to go and gain it in order to make that strategic plan work?
Right. And particularly for your partcos at that early stage of scale, there's a huge difference between getting like top people on your team and getting potentially people that are not the best fit, right, to help you scale, because there are certain people that can really help you scale, and there's others that might be better at maintaining, or they might be a little bit better once you have process and technology in place where you can kind of just plug them in. But to get those people that can go from 0 to 1 and really help you build that initial scale, you really need top talent. And I think I think at a high level intellectually, like I think founder CEOs get it, but I think that sometimes they just fall in this trap of thinking sheer velocity, just sheer speed, and they don't necessarily slow down and really think about the value of top talent and just the lesson, as you said, value, right? People are the primary driver of value. It doesn't matter if it's a product company or a services company, people are producing products, right? So if you have the best possible person in that job, you're going to get a superior outcome. And if you can get the best possible person repeatedly, you're going to have an exponentially different outcome of where you can scale your business to. So I agree with you. It's a good point.
So you're reminding me, I got into venture capital a long time ago. I got a chance to go when I started. I got to go, this is back in the 90s. I got to go out to Sand Hill Road, which for those who know, it's a very famous street there in Silicon Valley, where all the venture capitalists still are, and I got to meet, literally some of the giants of venture capital out there, and the Kleiner Perkins of the world, and those kind of guys. And all of them that I spoke to the one, all said the same thing. Troy, they said two things. They said, look, you're going to lose more than you win, but your wins are much big. You want really big wins to make up for all the losses. But number two, and the most important they ever told me, we always invest, they said, in A quality people, James, with B quality plans, and never the reverse. Never the reverse. Never A quality plans with B quality people. And I will tell you, the first question I get asked when the team brings me in, particularly at the early stage, and even at our later stage deals, one of my first questions is, how coachable is this person? Because more than, entrepreneurs mostly, to be an entrepreneur, part of the DNA in an entrepreneur, there's an ego. There's a high level of confidence and an ego with them. And there's a value to that. But like anything, too much of something is a bad thing. And the confidence can become arrogance. And so what we want, if you want our money, and if you want, I would argue to most venture capitalists' money, you have to be in a position, there's a humility that has to be added to that DNA mix. And you have to be willing to understand that what your idea might be pretty good, but to make it damn good, you need some help, and you need some counseling, and you need someone to help you craft it. And I think, and I can tell you, I can sit in a conversation in 10 minutes with an entrepreneur and figure out if they're willing to listen versus they already think they have the answer. And I was like, God bless you, good luck, and maybe they'll become the next, Elon Musk. That's great, but they won't do it with us.
Right. I mean, even Elon Musk, though, like when you watch some of his older interviews, he's talking about his companies. He's like, yeah, he was giving it about a 50% chance of succeeding. I mean, I'm sure he's very confident and whatnot, but there's also a certain level of just realistic kind of expectations and enough kind of doubt to really push him to, work hard in these types of things. And I think you're right. I think people who are going to achieve at a very high level, they need to obviously have that confidence and not second guess themselves, but they always have to be finding ways to poke holes in their own logic.
There you go.
And try to figure out where their blind spots are, right? Like you have to be obsessed with figuring out like, where's the thing that can kill our momentum, right? Where is it? And if I don't see it, it doesn't mean it's not there. It just means I haven't found it yet, right? Like
exactly. And be willing to have people around you who are willing to challenge you and can challenge you. And that's back to the whole point of this conversation is, we spend a lot of time in newspaper print or podcast minutes talking about founders. And those are important people, don't get me wrong. But one of the things we're intentional about at TEDCO is what I call the effort employee number 3. Because I know a bunch of serial entrepreneurs, James, who actually have never been, quote, the founder of their company. They've always been employee 3 through pick a number, early, pick number. And they just kind of, been recycled and recycled and recycled and recycled. And that's just as much part of the entrepreneurial process as being the founder. The person who gets all the headlines, the person who maybe does get the really big check and keeps founding. The people who are never in the headlines, employees 3, 5, 6, 7, acquiring that talent is just as critical as the founder coming up with the idea and getting it funded.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. That founding team is just so critical. And I forget who said this, but they talk about how special the founding days are. And if you screw those up, it's hard to rebound.
It's hard to rebound.
Yeah. And it's, I'll put it out there. I messed up a lot of my initial hiring 7 years ago when I started my company. It took me like 4 years to dig out of that hole. I mean, there was a lot of lessons learned. I started young. It was my first, it's my first company. So it took me about 5 years to figure out, okay, how to actually scale. But yeah, I mean, if you getting the initial team right, and obviously I wasn't, to be clear, I'm not putting on the team. I wasn't the right leader at the time. I had to learn too. So I'm taking ownership. Yep. But it's one of those things like getting that initial team right is critical. And you're right. Employees 1 through 10. I mean, that's where it's really going to have the most significant impact on your trajectory. I believe even more important than the idea, right? Like this is kind of, I think everybody's heard this at this point, but what you think is going to make you successful probably isn't, you're probably going to have to tweak and change, the product or the service is going to tweak and change as you speak to customers and learn about the market and where you kind of fit within it. Right.
Yep. No, it's that team. And I use the word team intentionally because they have to come together because many times they don't know one another and they're coming together. And clearly a lot of these folks take people from their own network. And that actually brings up a separate point, at least that we're focused on here in Maryland, is that we get that people want to get people around them that, come from the same kind of community. And that's usually around a university or a fraternity or some other group or previous venture. And part of what we're being intentional about, James, is how, I grew up in Houston, Texas, and I used to work at the Johnson Space Center for a couple of summers. And so I wanted to be an astronaut or astronomer. Didn't work out, a bunch of reasons. But I still talk like that. So I talk about this notion of orbits, that we, TEDCO, and I think others like us, we have to be intentional about creating orbits that collide. We have to force orbits to collide that would not have collided but for our intentionality. And if you see orbits that collide, those orbits create a new gravitational constant, a new celestial body. And that celestial body has elements of the two and other elements that get attracted because of the gravitational forces that get created. And that's what we want to do. And I hope that visual people get, because if you get two things that already have the same stuff, that new thing, isn't that exciting. It's just not. It's just another thing that got blown together. But if I can create two entities that don't have the same things, and that new body gets created, that's a beautiful celestial body that gets created.
That's a really cool analogy. I like that one. I might actually take that one.
You feel free.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So one of the things you've talked about is creating jobs and opportunities in Maryland.
Mhm.
I would love to hear your thoughts on how you go about tackling something like that. Whether it's like economic development or creating jobs or maybe providing training programs. I mean, how do you like, is there a high level way that you tackle that in terms of certain pillars or principles that help guide your tactics?
Well, I just mentioned one is that we're going to be much more intentional. When we invest in companies, we're soon will be launching what we call a talent portal as part of our Maryland Entrepreneur Hub, and I'll talk about that in a second as well. But that's going to be a place where individuals can go to look for talent that's outside of their normal orbits. To stick with that analogy for a second, and we're going to be intentional. So we can't make anybody go and we can't make somebody from Johns Hopkins go hire somebody from Frostburg or from Bowie State, some of other great universities here. But we can at least introduce those orbits, and hopefully those orbits will come together. I mentioned the Maryland Entrepreneur Hub because we believe that there are three real questions every entrepreneur faces. Three issues. Those three issues are: they lack time, James, they lack talent, and I needed a third T, so I used the word treasure. And treasure is both fiscal resources as well as other things that they might need, particularly like, they might need a wet lab. They might need access to 3D printing. They may need a lawyer. They might need talent, whatever those other things are. So what does TechCo do? We give them back a minute, and we have this thing that we call the Maryland Entrepreneur Hub, where we have all these great resources in the state. But what do you have to do as an entrepreneur? You got to go hunt them down. You got to go spend time finding them. What if you could put a profile about your company, where you are, and what you're looking for, and we go through an AI algorithm and bring them to your desktop or your laptop? I just saved you a minute, right? And then I just mentioned talent. We're going to launch, as part of that, we're going to launch a talent portal. And then on treasure, that's what we do. We help you, not just help you get a check and help you. And we love watching people, we call our capital stack formation. We love stacking our funds and getting someone that walk them through the pre-seed and then seed funds, and then our Maryland Venture Fund. And we just had a young man through a B2C company. He's got a great company called Remodelmate. He's one of our first companies to go through all three stages: pre-seed, seed, and we just wrote him $1 million check out of the venture fund. And so and he's a Black guy. And so it's an amazing story. So that's the kind of stuff we do to not just give them those fiscal resources, but introduce him to talent. And let me also say, introduce them to customers. We're working with a couple of portcos myself, introduce them to opportunities in the ecosystem where they can get either a beta test site or actual customer site. So we're doing that too. We want to make sure that, here's the real point. At the end of the day, TechCo puts in $1 at an early stage, and we actually normally exit, at a series C or D, pick a letter there. And obviously we want a multiple on the dollar that we put in. And we do pretty good on that. But in order to do that, we gotta have these other venture capital firms. Some of them are in Maryland, some are not in South Maryland. When they invest, James, we want them to say, not only was that a good idea that's in that company, it's a good company. And I think that's the two things, back to talent, right? There's always these good ideas, but have you built a company, a potential scalable company around that good idea? And what we want people to see is that we not only have good ideas, good market-based ideas, but potentially good scalable companies. We want the and function to be true. And we believe if we get the and function, we will get better multiples when people invest in Maryland-based companies that are TechCo portfolio companies.
I love that. And I have a quick follow-up question there. So it sounds like your team has decided to be very intentional surrounding providing support structure to early stage companies.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously a lot of different philosophies and approaches within venture capital. Some companies are trying to create, more resources available to portcos. Others are just saying, no, we're going to send you a check. And that's our level of involvement.
Yep.
Is part of the reason y'all are so involved because you're working with such early stage companies that they just need a lot more support, or is
Absolutely
it just philosophical? Like, how did you make that decision?
Well, we're 23 years old, so and I've only been here for two of the 23. But absolutely, yeah, I think, and we've gone through evolution of that. But yes, that was the early stage, and normally it's not just early stage, James. It's sometimes first time, and they're coming from communities where they don't know what entrepreneurship is, and they're smart people. They've got a great idea, but they don't know how to put it together. They don't know. They can see the idea, and there's the old adage, that necessity is the mother of invention. I changed that a little bit. I think inconvenience, because a lot of these ideas come from both inconvenience, but I also believe, I just had lunch the other day with a couple of banks, big banks. These are big, money center banks. And I said, the other thing is that this generation is challenging the legacy institutions. I mean, there's so much money going into fintech because people are asking the question, why do I need a bank? What's the role of the bank? And you see so much innovation comes out of the inconvenience of a bank, or the inadequacy of a traditional bank. And so I think part of what we're seeing is these great ideas where people have been inconvenienced, or they're questioning the status quo, but they don't know how to take that great idea and build a firm, as I said before, around it. And that is, yes, we spend a lot of time doing that. But I'll tell you, I just met with one of our latter stage companies, at breakfast with them just yesterday. And so they have still some of the same questions. They're trying to figure out how to pivot. What's going to be that inflection point for them? They've got a great product. Actually, this is one of our ones that med device that actually is selling in CVS. You can buy it on Amazon, but they've got a separate surgical product that they want to launch. And so their question is, what's the scale? How do we start to pivot, and how do we start to really scale to create, a really big multiple? So it's a similar type of conversation, but with a different type of response that's required of us.
I love it. I love it. And I also just think, just from a business philosophy perspective and values, I feel like this is a much more fulfilling way to do business, right? When you can provide resources and help people and contribute and provide value in more than one way, it just seems more, at least for me, I feel like that's just more fulfilling overall.
No, if you can tell, I'm passionate about this. Again, I've been doing this for 2 years, but to me, this has been, I told my board, just had a board meeting yesterday. It's accumulation of everything I've done in my career. I've been an engineer, I've been a consultant, worked in higher ed, I've been a venture capitalist. I've started my own companies. And so I've done all those pieces. And I literally every day I take pieces of that and bring it to bear for these. And to have some of the conversations that we have, that I get to have individually with portfolio companies, with ecosystem partners, with folks, for us to think differently about what that means in Maryland from an innovation and entrepreneurship. I do get excited about the potential and the opportunity. Not just for the state, but for the region. We're having conversations about what this means for the region, what it can mean for the DMV, and how do we begin to be in a place where to your our earlier part of this conversation is, talent's not going to just care about Maryland or Virginia. Talent's going to look for it. So how do we create a place that's attractive for that talent, regardless of state lines?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Georgetown's doing some cool things. They have venture labs in DC for startup incubator. But I still would love to see a lot more of a startup ecosystem in the DC area. I think, here we get a lot of GovCon services, which is nothing wrong with it. It's just not a lot of innovation, right? It's just basically staff aug. And so I'm excited every time I get to speak with somebody in tech or VC in this area. I get excited. I'm hoping more and more people get involved in this space in this area.
Yeah, I'm hoping that there's a TechCo-like equivalent in Virginia. It used to be called CIT. I keep forgetting the name. They just changed their name recently. So they do some very similar things in Virginia. I talked to their CEO, guy named Bob Stoley, and we're talking as well about how to create, and we're talking to others here in the DMV about how to create a regional fund, and talking to the folks in DC about how do you create a TechCo-like entity for DC. Because I think it's all needed. So I don't see it as a competition. I see it as a way to aggregate and elevate and scale what we should be doing here for the DMV.
I love that. And by the way, I'll just put it out there. I'd love to get involved if there's an opportunity there. It's something I'm passionate about as well. So I'd love to talk to you offline about that too.
Done. That's just a date.
Let's do it. So the other topic that we had up for today is DE&I, and you're in a really special position to influence that for a lot of companies. I would love to hear about how you communicate DE&I with your portcos and not only, have the conversation, but ensure that real progress is being made? Do you have any thoughts on that and
Yeah, I mean,
pointers?
part of this was like my orbit analogy, how to be intentional to create, that celestial bodies. That's the kind of the high level of it. We are very involved with the Maryland Tech Council. I sit on the committee for the Maryland Tech Council. I sit on the board of the Maryland Tech Council, and I sit on the committee of the Maryland Tech Council with our Technology Innovation Inclusion Initiative, TI2 initiative. And that is how to work with the membership of the Maryland Tech Council to be more intentional and give them tools. So we hope to announce here in the next actually few weeks our initial foray to do kind of an RFPI, I forget the last letter, but something that will announce an aggregate to look at the different technologies and services that we could post with no attribution, but saying, hey, if you're really trying to do something around DEI for your firm, here are some tools that you can use. And we've been along with about, I want to say about 17 or 20 other folks have signed DEI pledges that are up on the Maryland Tech Council site, where we're intentionally being transparent about what the journey that we're on, both the successes and the not so successes that we're doing along the way. But as it relates to the portcos, I mentioned the talent portal. We're going to open up and let people see that there's talent available. But I'll say this, that normally when this conversation comes up, it's normally an axis around gender or race or socioeconomic. And those are true, and there's nothing wrong with that. I would say the other axis that we wanted to revolve around, for Maryland at least, is geographic. The opportunities need to be as plentiful in Western Maryland and in Southern Maryland and the shore as they are around the 95 corridor. And so we have to be intentional about both that geography axis as we are about the race and gender axis as well, James.
That's really interesting. So I actually haven't heard the topic broken down like that before in terms of geography within states. So how did you come to that realization?
Well, the fact that I'm Maryland, so the logo over here on this side, I guess. I am the state of Maryland. But I have, in my short time here, I have visited every part of the state. I have spent time in Western Maryland and Southern Maryland, on the Eastern Shore, and Northern Maryland, and Baltimore, and Montgomery County, Prince George's County. And what I have found is there's talent, there is innovation, and there's opportunity happening. The challenge, like anything, opportunity isn't evenly distributed. And so part of what we have to do is better link that talent, that innovation, and opportunity so that it exists across the state, and that opportunity. So for instance, there are 30-ish accelerators, incubators across the state of Maryland, and some of them operating at different levels of impact and effectiveness. Well, we are working with all 30 of them to ensure that they all are operating at a certain level of efficiency, with a certain level of data utilization, a certain level of output, such that regardless of what zip code you are in the state of Maryland, you will have access to a high-class network that's networked in. And by the way, they may not have exactly what you need. So if you need something that they don't have, we know exactly where it is, and we can get you those services out of another incubator. Whether that's 3D print, whatever it is, we can get it from somewhere else because it's in the network. And so you don't have to scale up something that may only be needed once if someone else has needed 20 times and you only need it once out here. And so it's rethinking that, but more importantly, for the state, if we can, back to this whole notion of remote work, if all of a sudden the parts of the state that haven't had as much economic activity are elevated, all of a sudden I get excited about the idea that we could create entrepreneurial activities in Western Maryland, because all of a sudden there's been some real movement, migration of individuals moving to Western Maryland, moving to the Eastern Shore. And so that gives us the opportunity to latch into those ideas and find ways to do that, while at the same time tapping into some what I call natural resources, or the natural talent, or the natural types of technologies that are happening in those areas. Each area has its own little thing that they've got. We have this cool little map that shows these circles of different parts of the state and kind of where they've got some strengths. And so how do we make sure all that's happening and elevate all of those as well?
I love that. And one of the things that I think is interesting about remote work too is that it does, in terms of inclusivity, I think it does kind of spread opportunity, right? It makes it, people that may not be able to come into the office for whatever reason, whether they're local or not. I think it opens up the opportunities for people that otherwise wouldn't be able to take advantage of those opportunities
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I think the other part of the answer to your question is, I actually don't, again, I'm a big stickler for words. People talk about the wealth gap between blacks and whites in particular was talked about. And my challenge with that is, in order to close the gap, those who have, which are mostly whites, you got to go get money from them, which then has to be paid back. And so their bar is always, now, yeah, this bar is moving too, but the gap to me mathematically will be very difficult. And so I think the language has to become, James, around wealth inclusion and wealth expansion. We have to include more of people to these wealth opportunities. And we have to expand it. That's I just talked about, to those who have not been included before. And so this language has to change. And I'm an old engineer. I think we have to change the wealth equation, not try to address the wealth gap, but change the equation of who has access to wealth opportunities.
I love that. I love that. And we are coming up on time here. So I wanted to be cognizant of that. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Ton of value here. And we've touched on some topics that we haven't before on the show. So I know everybody listening is going to learn a lot, and I hope they implement some of the lessons you're sharing with us today. So Troy, thank you. And we'd love to have you back on the show if you're open to it.
Just name the date, my friend. Name the date. And again, like I said, we'll get together and talk about the DMV.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it. And for everybody else tuning in, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, James.